I'm a 30-year-old man, and my wife, Claire, is also 30. We met almost a decade ago in college, and, until recently, shared what I believe was a happy and healthy marriage. Both of us were thriving in our careers, and we were excitedly preparing for the arrival of our first child. Life felt perfect, or so I thought, until a few weeks ago. It was supposed to be a special night. I was turning 30, and we had planned a fancy dinner at a high-end restaurant. Claire looked stunning in her dress, her baby bump just starting to show, which filled me with pride and excitement about our future. We had spent weeks planning the nursery, discussing baby names, and preparing for parenthood. Claire had even talked about leaving her job to become a full-time mom, a decision I fully supported since we were financially stable. In the days leading up to my birthday dinner, however, Claire seemed anxious. I chalked it up to her pregnancy hormones and the stress from her demanding job. Her boss had been overworking her, calling her at odd hours, and keeping her late. I trusted her completely and didn't question her behavior, believing we were navigating this exciting time in our lives together. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was eager to celebrate. We had chosen a spot we hadn't visited in years, a place full of memories. Just as we started eating our appetizers, a man approached our table. He was dressed in a suit and held a thick manila envelope. Confused, I watched as Claire visibly stiffened. Her eyes locked onto the envelope, as though it was something dangerous. The man asked, "Are you Claire Adams?" Claire hesitated before confirming, her voice barely above a whisper. The dread on her face was unmistakable, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The man placed the envelope on the table and said, "You've been served. You are required to appear as a witness in the divorce trial of John and Emily Saunders." With that, he walked away, leaving me in stunned silence. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. I expected Claire to dismiss it as a mistake or laugh it off, but instead, she sat frozen, her hands trembling as she stared at the envelope. I urged her to open it, my concern growing by the second. With shaking hands, she tore it open and read the contents. Her face turned pale as she explained that her boss's wife had accused several women in the office, Claire included, of being involved in her husband's alleged infidelity. Emily, her boss's wife, suspected her husband was cheating and blamed Claire as one of the women involved. I was stunned. Claire worked for the man. How could she be caught up in something so scandalous? Claire shook her head and insisted she had no idea why her name was included, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But her reaction only made me more uneasy. As we drove home, the silence between us was heavy. I glanced at her, hoping for some reassurance or explanation, but she stared out the window, lost in thought. Over the following weeks, every time I brought up the court case, Claire brushed me off, saying it was just a formality and didn't concern her. But her avoidance only deepened my suspicion. Finally, I reached my breaking point. I decided to attend the trial myself, despite Claire's insistence that she would handle it alone. Her refusal to include me only made me more determined to uncover the truth. That morning, I took a half-day off work and drove to the courthouse. My heart was pounding as I entered the courtroom, hoping to blend in unnoticed. But when I walked in, Claire's shocked expression immediately betrayed her. The look on her face spoke volumes, and my dread intensified. I took a seat, my chest heavy with unease. As the case unfolded, I realized it was far more complex than I had imagined. The primary issue revolved around an infidelity clause in the divorce proceedings. Claire's boss's wife had hired a private investigator to gather evidence of her husband's alleged affairs, and Claire had somehow been drawn into the mess. The evidence presented in the courtroom was damning. It implicated 3 women in various indiscretions. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Claire was the only one from her office involved. The other 2 women were part of a social circle frequented by her boss and his wife. The atmosphere in the courtroom changed dramatically when graphic photographs and videos were introduced as evidence. These visuals exposed the affairs in a way that was shocking and humiliating. All three women were called to testify about their relationships with Claire's boss. Each testimony was filled with emotion, and when it was Claire's turn, tears streamed down her face as she answered the questions. My heart broke as I witnessed her pain, realizing that our relationship was falling apart right before my eyes. The judge asked Claire deeply probing questions about hotel stays, specific dates and times. Each confirmation from Claire felt like a knife to my heart. When the judge asked if she was the person in the photographs, Claire's voice trembled as she admitted, "Yes." At that moment, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Everything I believed about our life together shattered. Then came the worst part. A video was played, but only Claire and the judge could see it. I watched as Claire broke down, unable to bear what she saw. Ultimately, she admitted she was in the video with her boss. The judge asked if she recognized herself in the footage, and after a long pause, Claire, her voice shaking, confessed, "Yes." Hearing her cry out my name, her face contorted with horror, and begging me to let her explain was excruciating. Her desperate pleas felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. Overwhelmed, I stood up, my legs weak with adrenaline. I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, her sobs fading behind me as I pushed through the doors into the cool air outside. In the weeks that followed, I isolated myself, staying with friends and family to think and process the betrayal. Claire called and pleaded for a chance to explain, but I couldn't face her. The thought of her infidelity consumed me, leaving me in a fog of pain and confusion. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, my mind racing with questions about the baby she was carrying. When did the affair start? Was the child even mine? These uncertainties gnawed at me, forcing me to confront Claire about the baby's paternity. I demanded a prenatal DNA test. Although Claire initially resisted, she eventually agreed when I said I might consider staying if the baby was mine. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Weeks later, I sat at the kitchen table, trembling as I opened the sealed envelope containing the test results. My heart sank as I read the words. The probability of paternity is 0%. A numb silence engulfed me. The baby I had dreamed of and the family I had envisioned were never mine to begin with. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. With a heavy heart, I drove back to our house. Claire was sitting on the bed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, a flicker of hope in her gaze. I tossed the paternity results onto the bed and said flatly, "It's not mine." Claire's face crumpled as she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. She pleaded with me, her voice shaking, apologizing over and over. She reached out to me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Claire, it's too late. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now you expect me to forgive you and raise another man's baby." Her cries grew louder, but I turned away. "I'm divorcing you," I said firmly, my words hanging heavy in the air. "I can't live like this anymore." I walked out of the room, my heart feeling like it had shattered into a million pieces. There was no other choice. Claire had destroyed everything we had built together, the love, the trust, and the future we had imagined. Once outside, I broke down for the first time in weeks, crying as I stood alone, devastated by the reality of my situation. The divorce was straightforward. After Claire's affair became public, her boss's wife's lawyer provided me with the incriminating video evidence she had used against her husband. Claire tried to contest the divorce, but the courts denied her request. In the end, I walked away from the last 10 years of my life. Claire remained a single mother, living in the house we had bought together. I made sure to leave her with enough cash from our savings to provide a stable environment for the baby. As for her affair partner, he eventually faced consequences for his actions, but I won't go into detail. Let's just say he spent some time recovering in the hospital a few months later.